podcast with this very special guest, Kyle. And without any further ado, I love to introduce our general partner, Arjun Rao, to kick this off. Over to you, Arjun. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dhanush. Welcome everyone to a very special episode of Speciale Talks. This is our second season of Speciale Talks that we kick off today, episode number 1, with a very special guest. We have Kyle Poyar here with us, operating partner at OpenView Ventures, right? To talk about all things product-led growth and SaaS, which is one of the most important topics that's going around in the SaaS ecosystem today. And I think while it is such a big topic, there's still so much unknown and still evolving about PLG and how companies can build using PLG. So we're very excited to have Kyle join us today for Speciale Talks, the series of talks that we do with founders, operators, investors in the SaaS and technology ecosystem globally, right? So that founders can learn about these emerging sectors and topics, right? So we're very excited to have Kyle join us. Kyle, welcome to the show and thanks for joining us early from Boston. All right, would love for you to talk 2 minutes about your background and what you're doing, and then we can dive into PLG.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and good to see everyone. It's great to see the variety of where folks are from. So yeah, my background, I'm an operating partner at OpenView. OpenView is a venture capital firm investing in expansion stage software companies. So companies like Datadog, Expensify, and Calendly, as a few kind of household names. And in my role, I get to work with our portfolio companies on all things revenue growth and go-to-market strategy to help them hopefully accelerate revenue growth and dominate their markets. And I joined OpenView in 2016, which is the year that we as a firm coined the term product-led growth. And since then, a big part of my role has been figuring out frameworks, principles, best practices, case studies for how to scale with the PLG motion and the variety, because there's not just one way to scale with a PLG motion, which we'll get into. And so I share a lot of that out on the OpenView blog or on my weekly newsletter. It's called Growth Unhinged. And then otherwise, based in Boston, and before OpenView, I was in consulting at Simon Kucher, which is the largest pricing and packaging consulting firm out there.
Lovely. Thanks for that background, and super excited because you guys coined this term and this has gone mainstream and the whole world is really looking towards PLG as the next big thing and the next best thing, right? To scale and build great companies with, right?
Yep.
So maybe with that background, we do a little poll of the audience that we have, some founders, some operators, some people wanting to learn. We ask them, hey, and Dhanush can help us, you're using Streamalive to do this, right? Mm-hmm. Let's ask them what one word comes to mind when they think PLG. Very interesting. We're starting to see answers of what people relate to when they connect to when they think PLG, right? Growth, virality, CAC, user, adoption, scale, land and expand, that's cool. Product first, yes. Very cool, very cool. I think that's super interesting what everybody relates to and what everybody's own definition of PLG looks like. With that, Kyle, I'm going to come to you and say, hey, how do you define PLG, right? Based on all your learnings and what you've seen. And also an extension of that to say, hey, what is not PLG?
Yeah, well, it's great questions. And I guess even just unpacking it. So back in 2016, we debated a lot about what does this mean? What are the characteristics of PLG companies? When does PLG work? When does it not work? And at a high level, we think about product-led growth is fairly simple, just instances when the product is a key driver of acquisition, conversion, and expansion, right? So it's a pretty broad term, but it's broad purposefully, right? Because a lot of these activities have usually been done in a very resource-intensive, manual, and human-first way. We think about acquisition. The default mode for SaaS companies over the last 10 years has been outbound, cold calling, big SDR teams, very manual and resource intensive to acquire people to be interested in talking to you. From a conversion standpoint, that's also been very resource intensive for enterprise software companies. Oftentimes, buyers do months of research before they start talking to vendors, and then sales cycles might be 3, 4, 5, 6 months, involve lots of different stakeholders, not just the sales rep, but sales engineers or solution consultants, legal, procurement, finance, and it's lengthy for both the buyer and for the seller, and all of that adds cost in the process. And then it might take another sort of several months to even get set up to be able to start using the product. And we might go almost a year before end users ever get their hands on the product, and might need, hours and hours of actual training in order to figure out how to use it. And then it's no wonder that many software adoptions have fallen flat, because end users don't actually adopt the product, and the products don't work as folks maybe hoped or expected that they would work. And so for product-led growth, it's a dimmer switch rather than an on or off switch. It's starting to think about aspects of that process and where can you bring a product-first solution, which has the benefit of having a really consistent experience across an unlimited number of people from 1 to n, which allows you to be always on, right? Allow you to deliver a fast customer experience for folks, and means that you're not blocked from scaling. And so a lot of times the main growth limiter for software companies has been how fast they can hire up, and whether they can hire up everyone on their team at the right sequence at the right time. And so everyone's either overhiring, underhiring. That's how you grow, is scaling the people. In a PLG motion, once you've built it, it can actually not just support exponential growth, but even get better as you grow your user base, because you can get more data, run more experiments, and continuously optimize it. And so PLG companies have an ability to grow faster at scale, and much more efficiently and profitably than traditional software companies. And so all of that said, like the furthest end of the spectrum, like the fully PLG would be folks come to your website they discover your product on their own, right? Through organic search, word of mouth, product virality. They self-educate through the website or other channels. They sign up for the product via self-service, don't have to talk to a sales rep. They see value quickly through their product interactions. And then they even swipe a credit card, start buying without ever talking to someone. And then hopefully even have an expansion path, right? So that's like the furthest end of the spectrum of PLG. But there's a lot of different aspects of PLG and making a PLG motion work. I personally don't believe that you have to be that kind of bleeding edge to see yourself as a PLG company or to apply PLG techniques into your business. And so one thing that I will share is we spent time unpacking the 11 principles of building a PLG business in this kind of day and age. And the principles are kind of sequenced in order of kind of how you think about what's the starting point and then where you go. So I can share more about that as we go, but one of the things that I will urge you to keep in mind, because I think it's so critical as a foundation of PLG, is it means you have to build product experiences that end users love. So users often were the afterthought because you focused on the buyer, the person who signed the check. That buyer doesn't go away. They're still an important stakeholder. But now you're actually thinking about how to build an experience that solves for a user-focused pain and then turns users into champions who can go to bat for you. A great example is Expensify in the OpenView portfolio. And Expensify, their buyer is a finance person, right, who is managing expense reports, making sure folks get paid, making sure that they're compliant with expense policies. But they realized that there's a huge army of end users who are the ones submitting expense reports who have a terrible experience. They maybe have to keep physical copies of their receipts. They're constantly losing them. They wish they could just take a photo of their receipt, submit their expense reports via an app. And so Expensify offered free solutions for these end users who start using Expensify on their own and sending their expense reports to the buyer. And what this does is it creates this sort of bottom-up momentum in an account, and also helps educate the buyer, gets Expensify to the buyer, who all of a sudden knows Expensify because they're getting all these expense reports. It's a very different approach to building a company, but it's a much more powerful foundation to support growth than maybe a traditional approach would have been. And the other thing I'd add is that there are, so with this in mind of kind of PLG as a dimmer switch, there are instances when it's harder to go all the way kind of down the like path of pure PLG. And some examples of where it's harder are when you really don't have a user-focused value proposition, and the value proposition is much more oriented to the buyer, or company-wide adoption. Like you need everyone in the company to be on a product before they're really going to see the promise of that product. That makes it harder to do PLG, at least completely PLG. There's still ways to that we can talk about to test your way into it, or get some of the benefits of PLG. Other things are when you've got sensitive data and working with kind of complex product opportunities that are very sensitive. Your buyers are naturally gonna want to trust someone. They're maybe going to need more help to go through the onboarding and setup process. And so, not to say PLG is impossible there, but it's much harder to make it work. And so I think about cybersecurity products as a classic example of where it's just harder to build a PLG first company. And all that said, it's been fascinating to see, at least from my vantage point, to see companies that realize that there are these preconceived notions of where PLG is hard to do, and they still found a way. So even within cybersecurity, you've got examples like Sneak that have woken up and realized developers are actually a really core constituency in the security process. And historically, they felt blocked by the security professionals, but they're a core part of actually building a secure organization. And so Sneak went to a developer focus where it said developers are the end users of security. We can go developer first, and that can get us to the buyer. And so I'm expecting to see even some of these principles of like, hey, it's hard to do PLG in X area. There will be winners that emerge over the next coming years that have said, hey, we actually think there's an opportunity here that's been overlooked because people have said it's too hard, and that's going to give us a first mover advantage in this market.
Lovely. No, that's just so much to unpack, right? In terms of, where the advantages lie, and like you said, the extreme cases in the purest form of PLG. Of course, there are amazing examples of that. Calendly being one, Notion being another, right? A lot of these companies have really paved the way. And now you're saying on the other end of the extreme process, possibly, which we would all imagine to be very enterprise heavy and buyer focused, also there is an emergence of ideas that can be maybe PLG or product assisted, right? Growth that leads to then sales, right? Now, with that in mind, is there some correlation of when a PLG motion product works? Is the product, of course, you mentioned complexity of usage, ease of training, etc. Do we also correlate PLG to cost and price of the product? Is there a way to think about that? Are there any frameworks or thresholds to see as to how expensive is your product?
So I would say there's no hard and fast rules around that, around PLG and price. But I guess a few things that I would unpack for folks is that PLG doesn't necessarily mean self-service purchasing, and that even a lot of great PLG companies, much of their revenue comes from accounts that spend 100K plus, and those accounts are not buying on a self-service basis. There's some sort of sales assisted motion, and PLG in those cases is a way to both attract folks, give them an opportunity to try out the product before they buy, really make the most use of sales resources. So sales is working with accounts who already understand the value prop and are ready to buy. So it's a much faster, more efficient sales motion. But But I guess some things with PLG and pricing is that you generally want to give folks a chance to try the product before they buy, right? So deliver value before capturing value. And that could come in the form of a freemium offer, which is kind of classic, what people think about it as PLG, but also free trials, reverse trials, which are more and more popular right now, where there's you start with a free trial of maybe the set of the most premium features you offer, and then at a certain point, folks downgrade into a free forever version. But we've also got alternative views of this idea of giving value away before the paywall. Those could include ungated free products that support the top of the funnel, or there's interactive sort of product experiences or product demos with this rising category with the likes of Reprise, Novatic, and so on. They give people a taste of what that promised land looks like without maybe even needing to set up an account. And so one example that I will share, because it's a recent example that I featured yesterday, is a company called QuotaPath, which is, and I'll drop the link here for folks. QuotaPath is sales compensation and commission tracking software, which is a really complex problem to solve. There's a lot of stakeholders with RevOps, with sales, with different types of folks inside an account. There's a lot of integrations that need to happen. Historically, it's been a very lengthy implementation, very services heavy, very hard to change once you have your sales comp set up. You're also, you're dealing with paying people. So you really need to make sure you're paying people the right amount, not overpaying, not underpaying, and that you have a lot of trust. And so what QuotaPath has done is they do have some PLG, classic PLG opportunities, like a free trial where folks can kind of see value on a self-service basis. But one of the most interesting things that they've done is they've set up something called Compensation Hub, where you can get a free resource where you can explore all different types of compensation plans for different types of employees. And the classic one being account executives. So your sales rep, you're designing a comp plan, you're changing the comp plan. You can explore different comp plans that are out there and pros and cons, and then start building out what yours should look like and modeling that out in an interactive way. And all of that's free, ungated, just a publicly available resource. But as soon as you want to save that or start to implement that comp plan within your organization, that's when you sign up for QuotaPath and start to set up integrations and set up your own data, set up your own people. But it's a very product-led approach, and that kind of approach can apply even if you're selling to a large enterprise buyer, because you're really providing value and educating folks about the product before you're asking them to start paying you.
Got it. No, very helpful. I want to spend time a little bit on the very early stage journey of a company that is probably taking the PLG route, right? I have two questions there. One, how early should they know, or is there a stage when they're experimenting and figuring out if PLG is best for them, right? And I'm talking about the pre-product market fit phase, pre-PMF phase, right? And then what do you suggest they start doing in those super early days for them to really be set up for being a great PLG organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an important one because it's very hard in the early days, and I'm thinking like seed stage companies, Series A.
Yeah.
It's very hard to have multiple go-to-market strategies at the same time, like to do PLG and build out a sales-led kind of enterprise motion. It's hard to get one of those right, but to try to do both right at the same time is a very difficult tightrope. And so you want to really have a clear hypothesis about what you think is the best approach for your specific product and buyer persona. I guess the thing that I would encourage folks to reflect on is that product kind of discovery and sort of beta testing process with your target users. I would try to get a variety of users. So normally we think about, hey, we should focus on getting this feedback and testing from a really narrow ICP or ideal customer profile that's going to be that #1 target of who we're going to sell this product to. That approach makes a lot of sense for a sales-led motion, but actually means that you're probably not going to be set up super well for PLG. With PLG, you want to show that your product can actually work for a variety of use cases, a variety of personas, and that all of them can grok the product, then they can adopt the product on a self-service basis. You're also probably going to need to spend more time in that product kind of customer development process and kind of beta testing process, making sure that you're really pressure testing, like, is the product ready for self-service? If you were to open it up, go public launch, and someone were to get to your website, land on the product, how confident are you that they can see value on their own without talking to anyone on your team? And that's a really hard thing to be confident in. You might need to surround yourself with advisors or early stage investors who have experience with PLG products, who can be that extra set of eyes or provide coaching to make sure you're going in the right direction. But that's something that you have to be confident that your product is ready for that kind of self-service value proposition. The other things that I think about are like, what is your skill set and the skill set of maybe co-founders or your team? And that founder kind of profile ends up being important to what you can build well quickly. If your skill set is, hey, I'm really great at one-to-one interactions with enterprise customers, relationship-based selling, that kind of skill set is going to apply great to founder selling, bringing on your first, call it 10, 15 customers, bringing on an AE, training that AE, and coaching them. If your skill set is more product solutions and you love that, like building a really fantastic product experience that's intuitive, has a great UX, that's a very different skill set, right? And so that would kind of push you more into the PLG route or PLG opportunity.
Got it. No,
yeah, those are just some things. There's a lot to unpack them.
Yeah, so maybe just extension on the skill set part. What other key skills do you see that are unique to make PLG work, right? Of course, in the founding team, but as well as in the early team members that you want to hire in the organization. What do you want to see? I think you said product skills or user experience skills. What else do you want to see and do you want to hire? What nuance do you want to hire when you get your first 5, 10 employees?
Yeah, so the early team in a PLG company needs to be data driven. They need to use data to inform decisions, and specifically in product data and website related data around acquisition, because scaling tends to be around identifying gaps or friction points in the journey and using data to inform that, and then constantly either running experiments or optimizing the motion to support further growth. And so I do look for that data orientation. It's just very hard to successfully scale a PLG motion without being extremely data driven and detail oriented that way. Another thing I think about is just the founding team needs to not just be product centric in the sense of like really liking building product solutions for customer needs, but they need to have like a broad based product understanding of what's the persona for the product, what are their specific pain points, what's their journey of discovering products, what would motivate them to switch products, what is their aha moment within the product experience. So it's this idea of like really being focused on that user journey and delivering value quickly, which is not necessarily the core product skill set that everyone has, right? So it's product centric, but it's a kind of specific way of understanding product experiences. Those are, I would say, the most key, so that kind of user empathy and focus on the user journey and being data driven. I think otherwise, all the things that I think about are you want to have a clear hypothesis and be hypothesis driven, but also open to feedback and flexible to course correct, because there are times when you're going to say, hey, I've realized I built this for X persona, but this is a persona that's, not the one that we should have focused on, right? Like that quota path example I mentioned, they initially built their product for the sales rep, thinking that if a sales rep could put their own comp plan on quota path, that would mean the product was so easy to use that they could go bottom up in an account. What they realized is that the rep is actually not the ideal starting persona. The RevOps persona is actually a much better persona to go after. And so if they hadn't had that intellectual honesty and ability to course correct, then they wouldn't have gotten to the point where they are right now. So those are just some of the things that I think about. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other characteristics that go into having a fantastic founding team, and the chemistry across founders and the grit around building a startup. But those are some of the things that I think about are a little bit different in a PLG company.
No, very helpful, Kyle. Thank you so much. The thing I wanted to also talk about was, when do they say this is working, right? What metrics should they have focus on, right? While they're doing these experiments, while they're getting user adoption, what are the numbers? What are the metrics? What targets should they hope seed/Series A early on, right? And where should they spend their time looking? Because, in a product and where there could be variety of user personas, there could be a wide variety of data insights that they can spend time on. But how do they focus on the right ones that help them get to big wins?
So at that stage, I would say revenue is going to be a lagging indicator. And obviously, in like the current environment, we all want revenue, right? But revenue is not necessarily the best indicator that you're on the right track. And with a PLG product, my belief, and I would say a lot of folks at OpenView would agree with this, we actually can get comfortable that a PLG company has found product market fit much more ahead of revenue than an enterprise focused company. So if you're an enterprise focused company, you might sell 10, 100K deals for, get $1 million, but each customer kind of has some services involved, has a custom use case, has their own feature requests, and you're kind of left with this really challenging motion to go satisfy those deals that you just sold, and it's not necessarily repeatable yet. In a PLG motion, you might have thousands of users who are seeing value on a self-service basis, who are starting to convert at low dollar amounts, but then show natural expansion and kind of bottom-up adoption. And that, to me, is much more indicative that this company is going to have a much more long-term potential, and it's going to be able to build a stronger and stronger PLG flywheel. So things that I think about in particular are the user journey and kind of the product related funnel metrics. So when you look at sign up to activation, what percentage of folks that sign up reach that state of activation? We define activation as they see the value of the product that kind of you promised them going in. So that initial proof of value, an example might be like signing up for SurveyMonkey, finishing your first survey and getting 5 responses back, that you've hit your aha moment. And you want to show that that activation metric is it's consistent, it's north of, call it 20%, that folks can really get to this aha moment quickly and on a self-service basis. Other things are that kind of continues downstream. So you ideally want to show that folks don't just get to their aha moment, but start to they continue to use the product. So there's a usage retention where people are continuing to log in week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5 after sign up, that they're converting, even if it's at a low dollar size, but there's enough value that they have a willingness to pay and are starting to show signs of being willing to pay for your product, and that they're expanding, that they are sharing the product with us in their organization, they're increasing their usage. And ideally, like, revenue is the best signal for some of those metrics, but you can look at product engagement data, even if you're pre-revenue, to say, hey, look, our usage retention is really high. This indicates it's a super sticky product, and people's usage grows over time. They share the product with others in their organization or outside of their organization. that would be a really clear sign of product market fit, even ahead of monetization. And I think that you need to be looking at the product funnel data. And by the way, I recommend looking at it on a cohort basis. So not just across all of your users, but for the users that sign up in X week or X month, are they performing better than the cohort of users that signed up a week before, a month before, and constantly showing that improvement over time in the PLG motion. And I think you have to look at those PLG product funnel metrics. That you also have to be showing traction around your ability to acquire users. And this is something we haven't talked about too much, but in a PLG motion, you're not able to spend nearly as much to acquire a user to sign up for your product as in a traditional enterprise motion. That's part of the benefit, right? It's a more efficient model. There's also a lot of opportunities because you can go after users and not just buyers, but it's a challenge. It's a real challenge. You're having to find hundreds, thousands, and then tens of thousands of folks to get to your website and decide to sign up for the product on a self-service basis. And ideally, you want to show that you have a way to attract these users at a low cost, whether that's through organic search, marketplaces, referrals, word of mouth, product hunt, whatever. You have ways to acquire users that doesn't cost you that much, and that you're able to acquire more and more users every month. That's a great signal that you've built something that has a value prop that's very attractive and compelling for folks to actually put in their email to try it out for themselves, and that you're building something that isn't just maybe went viral in a short-term basis, but you're building a repeatable business model around your PLG product.
Got it. No, that's very helpful. The other part we want to talk about is, because it is the self-service sort of approach, there's a lot of product-led adoption, right? There is a mindset that might say you should expect a fair bit of churn because you're bringing in a lot of people into the funnel, right? And one must be comfortable with a certain high level of churn, as opposed to if you're doing SMB versus mid-market or enterprise, sales-led thing, you don't lose as many customers, right? How do you reconcile the churn aspect, right, that is sort of tied into the PLG motion?
Yeah, well, so a great question. One of the things that I look at it is like retention at a user and usage level. And so, and expecting that there's going to be a high drop-off rate of users from when they sign up to month 2, month 3, month 4, month 5, especially if it's before they start paying, or if you have some sort of free trial where you get people to pay, but they haven't maybe fully seen value or fully formed a habit around your product yet. So in a traditional PLG company, you might see if you get 100 signups, you might see 30, 40 of them get to their aha moment. And then of those 40, maybe 30 are left at the end of that first month. And then the second month, it's at 25 and then 20 and so on, right? So that's a pretty high churn rate or drop-off rate from a usage level relative to a sales-led business. But what we want to see is that it's a smile curve, right? So that cohort, there's drop off early because maybe people self-select out, they're not the right fit for your product, or they're tire kickers. But then once they have set up the product and seen value, they continue to use the product at a consistent rate. So flattening retention is more important than what percentage the retention is. Showing that curve and the shape of the curve is something that I look at more closely. The other thing is that you tend to see very high churn in a single user product. So if someone's adopting the product just as in single player mode for personal use or individual use only, the product is not going to be as sticky, and you're not going to benefit from expansion. But the goal is often to start with an individual user, and then to go from individual to team to maybe department to business-wide use, and to really go bottom up, right? And so when you go bottom up, you start to see so much expansion within that user base, because there's, one user can go to 10 users, that's 10x expansion right there. I would want to see the expansion sort of outweighing the churn at the user level. And so one of the things I look at is anyone with a team-wide use case. So that could be they sign up with a business email, or this is someone that's not using the product on a personal use or kind of test use basis. Is the expansion from them sharing the product with others, does that outweigh the churn that you see within that group? And that's a strong signal that you are actually going bottom up in an account.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. As an extension to this, right? Not every PLG company is a pure PLG company, right? They're somewhere on the spectrum. There are a bunch in the middle that at some point because it's a high value, team, department, organization buy, there is a buyer involved, there is a department involved, and it has to get handed over to sales. How do you see this transition of, a lot of organic usage, self-serve trials, and then paying, and then hand over to let's say an enterprise account management team or a sales team, right? And we're seeing a lot of this happen recently because they're using PLG to just get top of the funnel, right, and at least flavor of the product, but then finally selling really large enterprise accounts. And I think, maybe with a couple of examples, you can talk about what about this transition and how does a company have parallel motions at some point in time at scale? Say, hey, there's also a sales team that is then hopefully converting, right, primed up customers into or users into large accounts.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually see a couple of extremes that happen a lot. One extreme is that you have maybe a free trial or freebie motion, and then you actually send all of those to sales because sales wants to call as many as they can to hit their quota. And so it's actually not a great experience because you have this product-led-ish motion, but then sales is sort of counteracting anything that people are doing in the product and are not calling on the right people. It's not personalized. They're calling on small businesses, large businesses. They're essentially force-fitting a sales-led approach into a PLG business. So I see that being one extreme, not working super well. The other extreme is that you see companies that maybe start only self-service, don't have much of a sales team, if at all. And it's actually very hard for folks to even get in touch with sales. There's maybe not the best enterprise grade offering, or you start to realize, hey, you've got these users signing up at large enterprises, but talk to those users, and those users don't have access to the buyers or the budget holders. And so it's maybe not efficient for folks to just put a sales rep on an account because it's an enterprise logo signing up. So those are a couple of the areas where there are pitfalls to avoid. What I see the best companies doing is they'll provide personalized approaches based on the person signing up. And we think about that as product qualified leads or product qualified accounts. And I think of it as your goal is to offer the right kind of experience to the right kind of customer based on their product usage and what you know about them. And so that's going to start with some simple plays, but then you might want to layer on additional plays over time, right? So one play would be maybe giving people a chance to opt into a contact sales or sort of get help kind of approach, right? Where people are raising their hand that they actually want to go through a sales assisted motion. That way they're opting into it, and you have that connection point from self-service to sales assist. And you tend to find that when people opt into that approach, their conversion rates are very high, and they're really eager for that kind of opportunity, and they're not going to self-serve on the product very well. That's a starting point. Other things that you might look at are when people sign up for the account, running that sign up, that email address you get through lead enrichment, through a Clearbit, a ZoomInfo, whatever service you want, where you're looking at how large is the company, what's the title of the person who signed up, are they in your ideal customer profile or not? And so that might start to define an account as a high quality or kind of a high value sign up for you. And then you have to decide, are you going to put a sales rep on any account above a certain threshold, right? Hey, look, this is Nike, someone at Nike just signed up. I'm going to put a sales rep on this account just in case, because there's a lot of potential value here. And we need to have these conversations. Or are you going to have the kind of patience to say, hey, look, this is great. We had this top tier account sign up, but we know that sales touch points are best once we have 3 users in these kinds of accounts, or once we have someone in this persona using the product, or once people have hit this kind of usage milestone where their usage exceeds X, now is the right time for a sales rep. And that's where there's some really interesting roles to play for either growth teams or RevOps of defining that user journey and what's that right moment for sales to engage, where it's going to be a positive customer experience and going to improve conversion upon what you would naturally see. And so I think this is an area, by the way, that a lot of folks are figuring out, and there's a ton of testing going on at different companies to try to define for their specific business model and their customer base, what is that right balance of self-serve versus sales assist, and how can they ensure incrementality so that that sales assist touch point is truly additive over what self-serve can do.
No, I think this is very fascinating, and you're right. I think some of this transition is happening, and everybody's learning, and we'll see some companies do well, right? I do want to take a pause and just open it up to the audience to just understand before we go into further detail on certain aspects, say, hey, which are their favorite PLG companies, right? And I'll throw that same question at you, Kyle, and then we can talk about why, and maybe we can talk about some of the companies that everybody's talking about. But which are your favorite PLG companies, right? Maybe using Streamalive, help us out, Slack, AWS, very interesting. Calendly, Notion, yeah, usual suspects there. Notion seems like a star here. Dropbox, Datadog, yeah, Figma, Linear, yeah, a little more Datadog. Hotmail, I see somebody said Hotmail from a long, long time ago, but that's true too, I think. Wow. Airtable, yeah, Folk, Slack, ClickUp. Lovely. Yeah, I think lots of amazing names there. Yeah, I think Notion, Calendly, and Datadog sort of standing out there in this list, right, of favorite PLG companies. I think they were also OGs and pioneers. And so Kyle, hey, which ones are your favorites? I know you sort of love the ones that were bootstrapped PLG and built really large businesses, as well as the ones that didn't spend too much money, right? But just curious, which ones are your favorites, and any specific aspects of what they did are fascinating to you that you've learned a lot from?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously I have to say Calendly is one of them, right? They're a portfolio company of ours. We've worked with them for a little while now. And I think what's fascinating is there were a ton of actually scheduling tools in their space before Calendly, but it was not a market where any of them took off or did particularly well. And Calendly's founder, Tope, actually set out to build a free trial product and essentially a better version of some of these other products that existed. That he bootstrapped in the early days. He had an outsourced engineering firm, and he ran out of money to pay to put in a paywall. So he launched Calendly as fully free. And it was through that experience that he realized scheduling is an extremely viral product, because you're always scheduling with someone else, and that person might want to use Calendly. And so this kind of challenge from bootstrapping and running out of money ended up being probably the best thing that could happen to Calendly, and led to Calendly realizing this insane PLG opportunity in the scheduling space. And then I think even more recently, what's been fascinating from my end is they've really cracked the code on this idea of a PLG company starting to think about how to deepen their ability to go after specific enterprise valuable use cases. And in Calendly's case, it's around sales use cases and around recruiting and HR use cases for Calendly. And so building an enterprise sales motion and enterprise grade products and being able to start with that PLG foundation and have that transition to enterprise adoption has been just a very impressive story. I think with Datadog, it's another OpenView portfolio company. That's one where, for me, some of the elements I'm fascinated about with their model is that they have a usage-based pricing model that has a very big land and expand component, both on how on adoption of their core product, which was infrastructure monitoring, but then also they have now, I don't even know the number of products that they sell, but it's like in the dozens. And the product experience is so good that a huge percentage of their customers, they're very public about this, adopt multiple products. And so that idea of product as a growth driver and driving as from an expansion standpoint has been, I think, something that's very impressive about the Datadog story.
No, I think all of these are amazing examples. I think, and they built phenomenally large businesses with these approaches. I do want to talk particularly about us being in 2023, right? Which is a strange time, a first time and a unique time for a lot of us. A lot of the ecosystem after an amazing bull run, we have a tough time here, right? Capital availabilities. Ralph, there is a renewed focus on sustainability, on profitability, on lower cost structures, right? How do you correlate this to the PLG motion, right? Is that a disproportionate advantage in these times, right? If so, how? If not, what else can the PLG motion companies do to thrive through these unique stages, right? Again, we're all, it's a complex stage, it's new, so we're all trying to learn and adapt. But thoughts on how to navigate 23, 24 and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I think PLG should be seen as an advantage in this time, right? It's something where, to me, it's a very resilient model for a company where you can maintain a pretty healthy, I call it like natural or organic rate of growth through a PLG motion, where folks come in inbound through referral, through word of mouth, through organic search, you name it. They sign up for the product without talking to a sales rep. They maybe buy on their own or with a light touch kind of sales assist touch point. And then the product is so great that they naturally expand, they share the product with others and so on. Like, that's a really strong foundation that doesn't require a massive headcount in order to continue growing. You just kind of naturally grow in an efficient way. But then if times are good, fundraising is very available. There are things that you can do to put fuel on the fire, but those are optional, right? They're not core to the business. They are enhancements that you can make. So you can say, hey, we want to build an additional product, or we want to acquire an additional product, or we want to add more sales resources to drive up a higher conversion rate or higher deal size over what people would do on a self-service basis, or we would want to put more money into brand marketing and demand gen. Even though it's a little bit higher CAC, it's still, if funding is available, it's still worth that investment. And so PLG companies have a lot of optionality to control their own destiny and adapt to whatever is most valuable in the market. And so I think that's something that's a huge opportunity. The other thing is that in environments like these where there might be much more budget pressure inside companies, folks are not willing to invest a whole lot in new software products, people might be willing to invest their time. And we saw this actually in the peak of COVID, we're thinking March, April, May 2020, there was actually not a lot of purchasing of enterprise software unless it really specifically applied to like Zoom and remote work, right? But a lot of companies saw purchasing very much slow down, and their customers were struggling. But people would vote with their feet and start using a product for free, sharing that with others, and it became sort of inevitable that customer would pay for the product eventually. But they, it was just a matter of when they were asked to open up their wallet. And so I think with PLG companies, another benefit folks have right now is a chance where you can go on offense, acquire a lot of users, drive that engagement with the product, and then be in a really solid place when your buyers are comfortable paying and upgrading.
That's a very interesting point. So basically, you're saying the dollars and the buy might happen at a certain point, but the adoption and the usage and the trials should go up in such environments.
Yep, exactly.
Got it. Got it. Lovely. I think we're close to the hour mark, right? We're starting to get some questions from the audience, right? So we'll take some of those so that we can help them, right? Lux, who's the founder of Streamalive. Thanks, Lux, today for giving us a Streamalive for the product today, for the talk today. Lux's question: what are your thoughts on usage-based pricing being more appropriate for sales-light PLG companies to convert leads to dollars, especially seeing so many shapes and sizes of personas coming top the funnel? Usage-based pricing is the way to go. What are the nuances there, Kai?
Yeah, I mean, as folks might know, I'm a big fan of usage-based pricing in general, especially when you compare it to the alternative, which the alternatives might be like flat pricing, where you've got one price for just about everyone, or seat-based pricing, where you're charging based on the number of users who are logging in, which might not correspond with the specific value proposition that your customers see from using the product. And in this day and age, a lot of the innovation that we see in the market are products that have some sort of component around AI, APIs, or automation. And with those kinds of value propositions, the product value doesn't scale directly with more people logging in. And in fact, if the product's really working well, you might need less people logging in or less time spent in the app. And so in those products, you have to ask yourself, like, is a seat-based model the best way to communicate the value of the offering and to capture the value as we deliver value to our customers, or not? And I think that most folks realize the reality is some form of usage-based pricing is going to be kind of inevitable for the vast majority of software companies. And then that begs the question, what's the right structure for it? And what's the right metric or metrics that are based on usage and correspond with the value and willingness to pay of our customers? So on the structure piece, you could go like fully pay as you go, like AWS style, you literally only pay for how much you use. I'd say that that's great for AWS. There's some companies that have managed that pay as you go approach really well, but pay as you go is probably not the ideal approach. It doesn't give you much of a way to monetize features and value beyond usage. And it's hard to predict, both for you and for customers. So some customer segments might love it, some might hate it. And so a lot of companies have hybrid models. There's combinations of subscription pricing, feature-based pricing, and usage-based pricing, and that all sort of help them with their monetization goals. Other thing that call it is the metrics around your pricing. And the nice thing with seats or users is that that's a clear metric that can apply across lots of products. With usage-based pricing, that's a concept that can apply across products, but the specific metric you use to measure usage is actually going to be different depending on whether you're talking about Snowflake, Algolia, Datadog, and Airtable has forms of usage-based pricing. HubSpot does too. All of them have different metrics around their pricing. And so you have to think about a metric that aligns with the value that your customers get from using the product. It's something that ideally grows in the average account, corresponds with willingness to pay and budgets, right? So if the nice thing about a Slack or a Stripe usage-based model is they charge a transaction fee based on the amount of payment processing volume, right? So that's extremely flexible. It aligns with the revenue growth of customers. And so it's kind of perfect form of value-based pricing. But that's just hard for folks to come up with and requires a lot more work than a traditional seat-based model, and requires more testing and talking to customers to get it right.
Lovely. I think you did touch upon one of the questions that came up. in terms of how do you decide price, compute for storage, but you did refer to it, think about the value to the customer, think about how that can expand over time and still, without overly burdening what their budgets might be.
Yep, exactly. And I also just would call out, like, focus on also, the value proposition of your product relative to alternatives. And so you don't necessarily need to copy the pricing that your competitors have. And in fact, having a different metric might be a way to differentiate and stand out and talk about why you're not the same as maybe other folks in the space or other ways of doing it. But if your value prop is, hey, it's actually we've built a lower cost way to do X because of maybe a technology advantage you have that competitors don't have, and people might say, like, hey, compute and storage at AWS is actually getting really expensive, and you found a way to have high margins at a lower cost base, then maybe you do mimic the competitor pricing, but at a lower price. And that's because that's really highlighting the key advantage, and that kind of that transparency and comparison is to your advantage. But for a lot of companies, their advantage is not about, is not that they have a cost advantage, but that they have differentiated value where they help their customers grow revenue, reduce costs, reduce risks, and so on. And those might be based on another metric entirely, right? So I think an example that I think is just always a useful one is HubSpot, which when HubSpot, their core product has always been marketing automation, which includes landing pages, email marketing, and so on. When they started, they only had flat subscription pricing. They had a good, better, best model with a good subscription of a few $100s a month, a better that was, call it $800 a month, and a best or enterprise edition, so we call it like $1,500 a month. And they saw very little expansion within their customer base, high churn rates because they sold to an SMB and mid-market segment. And they started to think about, how do we actually have a growth path as customers see value? And they debated lots of different metrics that they could price based on. They could price based on how many website visitors you had, or how much revenue you generated, or like how many emails you sent. Like, there's a lot of different factors. And they ultimately came across one of marketing contacts. And so as you're starting out as a small business, you want to use HubSpot to grow that customer base. And if you're successful, you're finding that you can grow that number of contacts that you have 10x, 50x, 100x, whatever it is. And the more contacts you have, the more revenue you can generate as a business. And so HubSpot moved to this model that allows them to land folks at an affordable price to see value in HubSpot, and then captures value as people are successful, but only if people are successful. And then that also obviously leads HubSpot to build product features that drive more marketing context for their customers. And so the incentives are aligned, right? They're trying to help customers grow their business. Customers want to grow their business. And so now they have a way to monetize any innovation that they offer in a kind of intuitive way for their customer base. And so that's something that I think that just is a story where they had to come up with a model from scratch that hadn't existed before. There were a lot of pros and cons with every model that existed, but ultimately going with something was a very good decision. I think they've increased their net retention rate from about 75% to close to 100% after that change. And so a huge impact on their business.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. That's very, very helpful, right? Bunch of other questions here. I'm going to take one or two more, right? One is there, have you seen average time for journey to go from individual use, personal use, to go to a team enterprise sort of a use for, in this PLG motion? This is coming from Tina at Streamline.
Yeah, so I guess I think of it as like there's personal use that that individual use could be two factors, right? There could be people using the product outside of a commercial setting, or as an individual in a commercial setting. And so if it's outside of a commercial setting, the time to go from individual use to team use is like infinite, right? They're just not going to do that unless, maybe it's a developer and they're using a product for a side project themselves, and then they advocate to bring it into their business organization when the need arises. But that's that's sort of really specific to the developer persona. You don't see that a whole lot outside of it. So like someone's using Notion at home, they're probably not going to expand into a team anytime soon. But I'd focus on that commercial opportunity, but where you start with an individual. And that's where in terms of a timing standpoint, it really depends on the product. Some products like call it Figma or Slack are built with collaboration and team-wide use really front and center and top of mind. And so people go from an individual to a team very fast in those kinds of products. There are other products where they haven't built a whole lot of team capabilities. Thinking like a SurveyMonkey as an example. SurveyMonkey, you don't necessarily, I mean, they've added actually a lot of collaboration more recently, but for a while, you would, if you wanted to, to make a survey, you wrote the survey questions, you sent it out, wasn't a whole lot of collaboration involved. And so it would take a while to go to multiplayer mode. And I think more and more companies are trying to find ways to make the product, make the collaboration aspects of the product very visible early on in the user's journey so that people intuitively understand those use cases. And so it's not such a difficult bridge to cross to go from individual to multiplayer use. And they might even measure activation. Like at Slack, they don't measure activation by saying, hey, did one person send 50 messages in Slack? Activation at Slack is, I don't have the exact metric. I think they probably changed it internally, but from my understanding for a while, it was, did 3 or more people use the product at least twice in the first week after signing up for Slack? And that's indicating that it's a team use. It's messaging tool. People are actually messaging each other, collaborating with one another on the product. And that's their signal for activation, not an individual mode activation. And so I hope that answered the question, but I basically don't have a strict rule of thumb and would just encourage you to really try to make that collaborative value prop very visible, because that's where ultimately a lot of the value comes in, both for your customers and for your business.
Helpful. Many more questions, but we'll take probably a couple more. And I think the Indian SaaS ecosystem has followed a lot of land and expand sales strategy, typically historically, right? Does that sort of still hold true? And if so, in what form? I know you spoke about expansion within, etc. Maybe it's tied into the collaboration itself. Is there any other way to say how do you do land and expand with PLG?
I mean, PLG is inherently land and expand, right? So I think it's aligned. I think that even if you do have a sales heavy land motion, where PLG can come into play is, a lot of that expansion that happens should happen based on folks seeing value in that initial land use case and thinking about ways to use the product that's incremental to maybe what they initially bought. And so you're going to want to look for signals of how many people are logging in every week, every month. Who are your active users in an account? Is usage growing? Is usage decreasing? Are there features that once someone's used this, it corresponds with greater likelihood of expansion in the future versus it corresponds with greater churn in the future? And then driving product experiments and interventions to drive maybe in-app trials or drive additional adoption, which you can maybe monetize on a usage basis. So I think there's a ton of surface area around PLG for expansion, and big things I would think about beyond just the product analytics and telemetry into the usage behavior, which should inform both like who you expand and how you expand them. But then there's also things like, how easy is it for your product users to invite other teams and to expose other teams about the value prop of the product? Do you have a Slack integration, for example, where people can push out insights from the product into non-users so that you drive that awareness in an organization? Or do you have maybe insights that people can also share back with other people in the organization to drive greater ideation about ways to use the product in newer creative ways? Do you have in-context kind of prompts and messages that explain how to go deeper with the product or how to use advanced features that people don't currently have access to, but might be really relevant to do even more than they've thought about? Like there's a ton of surface area there. And so I think it's certainly aligned. It's just a different set of growth experiments and things that the team would work on in that motion versus the landing motion.
Got it. I'm just going to merge a couple of questions. I think we're well past time and getting amazing insights. Right, two things. One, is there a right time to start with monetization experiments? I know almost tied into there is a free product, freemium product leading to a paid product. That is one. And then are there industry standards? Are there numbers, metrics that somebody can refer to in terms of how much conversion to expect from free trial to paid?
Yeah, good questions. And so on the monetization side, so there's different approaches that folks take. I don't have like a hard and fast rule. I'm sharing some conversion rate benchmarks here from our product benchmark study, by the way. And these are split for free trial and freemium products. But I guess in my mind, the monetization makes sense if you can prove that you can get people to see value and continue to use the product. Like that, if you drive that stickiness and product value, then that gives you a lot of opportunity for monetization. If you don't have that stickiness, or people are maybe logging in once and never coming back to the product, it's going to be really hard to find success with monetization because you don't have that core PLG experience nailed down. All the things that I just think about is like, how confident are you about what you're going to monetize, and what should be free versus what should be paid, and who is the target customer to kind of upsell into the premium version. And so if you've been confident that you know the best thing to monetize, the value prop of it, and you can build that out while also supporting that kind of user journey to get people to kind of activation and stickiness with your product, like monetize away.
Got it. No, I think we have many more questions, but we'll wrap with one more question, right? Headline, right? Maybe the audience can tell us what they're struggling with within PLG and figuring out PLG, the top one or two things, and then we'll have Kyle to kind of comment on those, to help you out or point you in the direction of where you can learn those things, right? What are you struggling most with in implementing PLG in your company? Top one or two things. Coming to mind. Yeah, that's interesting. Building internal plumbing with a small team to measure and act on all signals. Yeah, early on, that's a challenge. Thank you. Anything else?
On the internal plumbing piece, a lot of the product telemetry and product analytics tools have been just complicated, a heavy lift to set up. Thankfully, there's been some more like easier to use, off-the-shelf types of tools. One that I would just encourage folks to think about in a B2B SaaS context is a company called June. You could think of them as like if Amplitude or Mixpanel were purpose-built for B2B SaaS and earlier stage startups, like what would it look like? So it could be a good way to get a faster kind of time to market around plumbing, around kind of user journey signals and analytics.
Got it. I think some of the others are sort of connected in terms of which metrics to focus on, how to, and then the other thing was cultural shift from sales led to a PLG motion. I think that Kyle may be covered in terms of hiring the right mindset team early on, right? That you can focus on. The plumbing is connected to what data, what metrics, and how do you set the conversion funnels, right? So those are sort of went to introduce customer success. Those were some of the other things. Or developer advocacy. I think people talk a little bit, maybe this is the only one I want to talk about. People talk about community. People talk about evangelism and developer advocacy, particularly in the dev tool side of things, right? Are these critical? How do you see these interplay with the overall PLG motion?
Community and PLG, actually, it's been a hot topic lately. I do think that community can mean a lot of things. Like there's a lot of elements of a community strategy. It could mean community from a support standpoint, community in terms of user-generated content. It can mean a million things. I guess the big thing for me are make sure that you're building a community, or you think about a community strategy in terms of the value proposition to your target audience. And then the tactics and the sequencing of it is very aligned to that. And so at a Webflow, for example, they realize their target audience are often freelance web designers and web developers who are working on their own. They don't have a peer set to sort of bounce ideas off of. They're kind of eager for that connection because they don't have it in their current roles. They also are hungry for, getting new business with clients and making themselves look good, kind of showcasing their work. And so for Webflow, community was a very early on part of it was something that they added even before launch. And they found that part of the community is kind of forums where folks can talk to each other. And that's led to amazing user-generated content that ties back into the marketing channel, right? There's other companies where they say, hey, we're actually building a product for a new persona that doesn't, exist at the average company, or it's someone that's, doing this job for the first time, and they don't necessarily know what success looks like or what are the best practices. And so we're going to build a community that's peer-to-peer thought leadership and help kind of evangelize this category. That's just a very different kind of community, because a lot of times that kind of community isn't just for your users, that's for everyone that meets that profile of that target audience, independent of if they use your product or not. In the PLG space, Pocus is a good example of that. They built a community for people thinking about product-led sales, and that community started before they had a product even to sell to anyone. And so it's probably too much to unpack around community, but I guess there's very powerful community strategies out there because you're building a product that has a lot of end user love and end user adoption. Community is an interesting way to kind of nurture those users, get them to go to bat for you, get them to refer others, keep them in your corner, and can be relatively low cost lift. But community strategies often fall flat. They're hard to measure the success on. You don't want to be too commercial in a community setting. And so they're easy to get wrong. So just make sure that it's really guided by a deep insight into your user base.
No, absolutely. I think there's, like you said, there's so much to unpack and it's still evolving. There's just so much to unpack even in the overall PLG space. We could go on and on, but this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much, Kyle. We want to sign off here, right? There are lots of questions. We will funnel some of these questions to you offline, right? And of course, Growth Unhinged is probably a great place for them to get a lot of these answers. But thank you so much, Kyle, for this lovely, lovely conversation, right? Let's all keep learning. And maybe we'll do one more in a year's time and with all the new learnings.
Sounds good. All right. Well, good to see everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Signing off from Speciale Talks. Take care. Good day and goodbye.